Hello and welcome to Meeting People with me, Amal Pandya. Meeting People is a podcast where I have long conversations with rebellious, adventurous and sometimes courteous free spirits. Shoaib, nice to see you. Thanks for sparing the time.
Very welcome. My pleasure, Amal. And thank you for the opportunity. And it's great to meet you in person after such a long time.
I know, it's been a while.
Yeah.
Well, look, I want to talk to you about your book that's just come out. And I'm going to hold it up for the camera for people watching and for people listening. It's called The Great British Disconnect, The Nation That Stood By as the City Sold Its Soul by Shoaib Akhtar. I mean, that is quite a powerful title, and it's got lots of powerful ideas and concepts in it, and some of it is frustrating in many ways. So why don't you just start off with what made you want to write this book?
Sure. I didn't write this because I like shouting into the void, This has been written due to growing frustration.
Yeah.
Having worked in the industry for almost a decade, seeing the decline, and it never stops. So I just increasingly grew frustrated with the decline, with the delistings, with the way things are being handled, and hardly anybody seems to have noticed.
And by delistings, you mean UK companies coming off the UK stock market?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought this is something worth writing for and something worth fighting for, and it's just the way things are at the moment. I think we just shrug our shoulders when our key institutions are divesting from the domestic economy, like pensions. It doesn't send a very good signal to the international investors or even the domestic investors. So in a nutshell, the book was written out of growing frustration. And it took me a good few months. Most of it was written on the train between London and Manchester.
Some of the best things are written on the train, I imagine.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and that's it, really.
So by institutions, you mean UK-based big professional investment pools of capital, not putting money into UK companies.
Yeah.
Now, most of the audience will be not in our industry, so why should they care? What's the importance to them listening? What is this a symptom of for you, or a sign of that you has prompted you to spend your train journeys not watching YouTube, but putting pen to paper?
Absolutely, it's the de-equitization, which means the shrinking size of our public stock market. Mm-hmm. At the moment, there's a disconnect between the general public and the stock market. In other countries, mainly in the developed countries, people are connected with the market. They have greater affinity with their stocks. People talk about NVIDIA. The way people talk about NVIDIA in the US, they don't talk about Next here in the UK. Yeah. And the disconnect has been growing, and as a result, and part of that is financial literacy at school. Mm-hmm. People have not been taught what it means to own a part of the economy you are going to retire into, and what it means to own domestic company shares, and what it means to support the domestic economy. Because if we don't support these companies, nobody else will. And most of the time, what the trend which we've seen over the last few years is the overseas buyers been very active, just picking off excellent British companies at a discount. It's like a bargain sale, and that's the bit which worries me.
Okay, so you believe that there are, I guess some people say, well, you're confusing cause and effect. There just aren't that many, there aren't any NVIDIAs here, so why should the UK stock market be thriving until we produce good companies? But I mean, in the book you allude to companies like ARM and Inmarsat deep mind as well, getting, which is obviously in the private market, but still, not even getting to be available to buy for UK public investors. So you don't see there an issue of not being good quality companies in the UK. It's a broader issue of savers not being involved in that growth.
Absolutely. There is no dearth of quality companies in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the balance sheet robustness, and look at the valuation, and look at the income generation capability of these businesses. I think overall it's excellent. It's just we've just turned our back on our own domestic businesses, and it's like a domino effect, and it's getting worse. If you look at the outflows from UK equity funds, in 2024 alone, there were outflows to the tune of 9.6 billion from UK equity funds, followed by another 1 billion outflow in January this year, and the bleeding hasn't stopped yet. Where that money has been going, over 27 billion of that went into international equity funds. By international, we both know that is mainly US passive trackers. So there's plenty of capital to go around, but there's nothing for British companies. And that's the bit which I find concerning and a little sad, in all honesty. The country which laid the foundation of the current or the modern financial system is now struggling to have a single company worth over $1 million so far this year. Not a single company, not one has floated on London Stock Exchange over $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
And so far this year, there's been more than 30 companies which have received takeover bids. Half of those are from overseas buyers. When I checked last, there were still 15 companies with live bids for about 10 billion. So that is the de-equitization. So to put it simply, for every firm, every new company which floats on a London Stock Exchange, that is matched by 3 takeover bids. So there's no comparison.
At some point, there'll be nothing left.
Exactly.
So, and the cause of that, just so people are clear, is that because UK pension funds and UK savers are not buying shares in these UK companies, their prices are low, which means lower than they should be relative to the same company, let's say, somewhere else in the world. And so that company goes, well, it makes sense for me to buy this because it's not valued properly compared to the same money that I'm making here.
Absolutely. It's not that they have stopped buying it. Why don't we talk about the elephant in the room, which is the pension funds? There's 3 trillion currently trapped or held within the pension funds. 3 trillion is about the same as the market cap of Nvidia, or slightly more than the market cap of the entire UK stock market. So we can't say there is not enough capital. There is plenty of capital, and it's not the pension funds have stopped buying. They've been aggressively selling British stocks over the last couple of decades. Back in the day, in the 90s, an average UK pension would hold about 50% in UK equities. That has now sort of staggeringly declined to about 4%. And it's a bit like a parent saving for their child, for their future, but won't feed them overnight. That is the way it is. Because if the pension is saying we are saving for the future, but they won't feed the current lot of companies which are craving for capital. There's no dearth of quality. These are excellent companies. Whenever a foreign buyer takes, or whenever the companies go list abroad, they do all right. And so there is potential in the companies, but there is no domestic backing.
And we're in this kind of vicious cycle where, because all the other companies have gone to list abroad, you're more likely to do the same thing and follow them. Can you talk? You talked about the elephant in the room in terms of pension funds. Can you talk about some baby elephants, maybe, in terms of saver UK, just your average UK, wealthy saver? A friend of mine does what you do. He's a wealth manager, and he said he recently pitched to a client who, or potential client, who's a successful businessman, So every time I get liquidity out of my business, all I do is buy property.
Exactly.
And then I have the rest in cash.
Yep.
I don't see the value of putting it into the market. Is that quite common? Is that are UK savers, individual savers, pension funds aside, also not involved in buying UK shares?
Absolutely. And that is embedded in the culture. So when I say it's a strategic abandonment, by that I mean it's now over the last decade or so, it's being embedded in the British culture that they don't have the same affinity they used to have for British shares. We used to see, the share certificates come through the post, through the doors. And
so you've lost that kind of tangible piece of paper
exactly.
that you own a bit of Marks and Spencer or ICI or something. Yeah,
absolutely. And the other thing, the opportunity cost is huge. Duncan Lamont of Schroeder recently did a research, and so that there is about 300 billion held in cash ISAs. Had we utilized that would have sort of returned about 500 billion over the last 2 decades. So that's a massive opportunity.
Yeah,
cost.
And that was just sat in cash, probably losing money because of inflation.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And why? Can we just double click on why people should care? Why does it matter if UK investors won't invest? As you said, foreign investors are coming in and doing it for them. So the companies are getting money. The disconnect that you talk about and the soul that's being lost or being sold, is that where it comes in? It's in the kind of the meaning of being a British citizen and having value and a stake in the system. Is that what you're pointing to?
Yeah, absolutely, pretty much.
Yeah. Because
if we don't know who controls the economy or who controls our water companies or our airports, it's all in the book. Then we, if something goes wrong, we can't really blame the government, because even government sometimes can be limited in its response because somebody else is managing it or running it from overseas. So it is very important, I think, for the British public to own the British stock market and to have this sense of pride in that ownership, because in a nutshell, it's a civic duty to have this national pride, because these are the buddy companies which are providing fuel to the economy, and if you don't take care of them, somebody else will, mostly at a discount. And then some of those companies, some of these have been strategic assets, defense stocks, infrastructure. So that is what, when I say that disconnect has been growing, that is exactly, what it means. We need to revive that sense of pride in backing British businesses. Other countries do that. There is a Buy American Act. So many other countries, the golden visas, and every country has this backing. And but to me, Britain appears to be an outlier in this. We are just too polite, and I think it's getting out of hands, frankly speaking.
But I agree with you, and it all resonates. I think you mentioned 2 very interesting words, civic duty, which I've on this podcast before talked about how the fact that words like duty and loyalty have become very old-fashioned, and people sort of either take a very rationalistic or almost pseudo-scientific approach to life. Mm-hmm. And so the rational thing is, if a company wants to buy you from overseas, they want to buy you. Well, who are you to stop it? What's the what's the benefit of preventing, in inverted commas, market forces from moving? Why do you think? Do you think this British disconnect with the city is resemblant or emblematic of a broader problem with Britain outside of the city, and this is just another symptom of it? Or do you think this is more of a prime causer of that? Because if you lose the financial capital, then you therefore subsequently lose the kind of civic capital.
Absolutely. I think London is integral to everything revolves around the city, in my view, and the financial services industry is the backbone of our economy. So the thousands of jobs it supports, and it is also one of those symbolic, I would say, national monuments which we have.
Yeah.
One of the oldest stock exchanges in the world. So it would be a great loss if, because we will just simply become a thing of a past, or like a relic, or a peripheral of international markets. If British businesses keep getting delisted, or they've stopped getting IPO'd in the London, we need to make it a bit more attractive for our domestic companies. At the moment, any budding investor, when they think about quoting or getting quoted or listing on the London Stock Exchange, at the back of their mind is how much premium do you think we can get off it? They don't want to stay forever, or to thrive, or to graduate into the FTSE 100 or 250, So that is the bit which is worrying for us. And when I say it would be a great loss, it's not just for everybody, even for us in our industry as well.
Sure.
I'm a fund research analyst. A UK fund managers, would probably lose his job. So there are so many jobs connected to this particular, sector, which are currently at stake, in my view. And it is our civic duty to do everything in our power to revive it. I think there has to be a genuine effort to get things going. And there are people in the power, because most of the proposal in the book, it is something to do with people in the power, politics, or regulatory things. We need to make those changes to get it moving. So instead of just blaming people or pinpointing it, I think we need a unified national
and you
effort.
do a very thorough list of solutions. I think 10 suggestions, which we'll come on to in a bit. And I want to make sure I'm clear on kind of the causes first and the kind of backdrop. So we've covered the big people who look after our savings and retirement, the kind of professional fiduciaries have tapped out. The savers are more interested in cash and property, which we'll come on to. And you said something else that was very interesting in the book, which is a system that punishes volatility, but forgets, that volatility is often the price of progress. So we are, and I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, just to name one example, Simon Evan Cook, who's a fellow fund researcher like yourself. We're afraid of downside impacts of our actions. So if the easier thing to do is to buy an international US stock, you're less likely to lose your job. You're not rewarded for taking the risk of buying a UK stock. So you get that kind of death spiral. So are we just too afraid of taking risk now as a society?
Absolutely.
More generally.
Absolutely. And there is a designated chapter in the book, the cost of risk aversion.
Yeah.
And the Duncan Lemont's research I alluded to earlier, this is exactly what encapsulates this whole phenomenon, that the public is too timid, especially since the GFC. People, they don't mind the US markets or other international markets, but they don't seem to back the British businesses. And that is what worries me. It's just, I think it's embedded in the British culture.
Yeah.
We need to revive that. And one of the solutions is financial literacy at school age, what it means to own a share in your national economy and how you can relate to that.
Yeah.
We have lost that touch. Other countries still do have that.
Yeah, I think that the US administration at the moment is talking about every citizen that's born will get $1,000 in the S&P 500 when they're born, and that will just, go straight into an account, and they can watch it, see what happens to it, and get an understanding of what it means to have skin in the system. And to the issue another example of the kind of issue. I think the London Stock Exchange Group is a small part of an overseas business, which is not particularly incentivized to innovate or make it easier or better exchange, or find new ways of attracting companies or make their life easier as public companies. But one, I guess, challenge is, isn't this de-equitization trend actually a global one? I think similar stats exist in the US, where companies are just choosing not to go public because of the regulatory burden that comes with it, or the pub scrutiny. And so it's not just the UK, this is a global theme. Is that something that's the case, but even more so in the UK, or is there something special going on here?
I think in the UK, as I mentioned earlier, we have become an outlier.
Yeah.
It has got to a chronic stage. I mean, it never stops. I mean, look at the outflows, and the de-equitization trend can be seen all around the world. But here, it has got to a stage where if it doesn't get stopped now, or if it doesn't get reversed, we may not as well have a stock market in a few years.
Yeah.
In about 10 years or so. Charles Hall of Peel Hunt has said, about the UK's smaller companies, that so we may not have, smaller companies segment in a few years' time. So, which is quite a damning portrait of how things are at the moment. And when you compare the stats, there is just no comparison.
Yeah.
Like every £1 put up by a domestic British investor is matched by £6 by a foreign bidder, if you look at the stats, which is just a staggering difference. So that's why when I say British is an outlier, it has become an outlier. And the part of the reason is, one of the proposals in the book is, we don't have a strategic body which keeps an eye on overseas takeovers of strategic assets. Yeah. Yes, we have recently got the Act, but that's a very narrow in its domain.
So every other country will, I know India has this and the US has it, I'm sure China probably has an extreme version of this, but like if, let's say, a overseas company wanted to take over Lockheed Martin or something, or Nvidia or whatever, something that was strategic to the future of the US, yeah, there is a body that will assess that and go, maybe this one, if it was an ice cream company, fine. Yeah, but maybe exactly. This one, it'd probably be better, even if it's less well managed potentially, that it stays in American hands. And we don't have that here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we need to do something about it. That's one of the... So I propose SAPA, Strategic Asset Protection Authority,
yeah,
which will track everything and would intervene as necessary, especially if the stock is of strategic importance and of national interest. And that's only fair. It's not xenophobia or abandoning the international capital. Far from it. We need the international capital, but we need to draw a line.
Yeah.
We need to have our own national self-respect. At the moment, excellent British companies are being gobbled up left, right, and center, and nobody seems too bothered.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I mean, you look at a company like Rolls-Royce, which is, we know we've got an energy transition problem. We know we've got a kind of multipolarity in terms of global strategic balances happening, where Britain is sort of very weak at the moment in kind of being responsive. And we've got this company that's kind of solved nuclear at the kind of modular small level, but they've not been allowed to roll it out for years and years. And, I remember Nick Clegg saying in 2010, why bother worrying about nuclear? It's only going to come online in 2022 or something. And look, here we are 3 years later.
Exactly.
Shout out to James Baxter-Derrington, who brought that up in the last episode. But you mentioned something really interesting, which I just want to have a rant on, about the timidity of the British public in general when it comes to taking risk and also kind of being invested metaphorically as well as literally in their country. And also the kind of the innovation and strength of the UK institutions that kind of provided the modern foundation of finance and capitalism. And I was reading recently, I mean, it's really powerful. When I was reading your book, it reminded me of when I was recently reading about the Anglo-Dutch Wars in the 17th century, which I'm sure you came across in researching this book. And there was an occasion, one of the interesting things about the Anglo-Dutch Wars was one of the first wars that was very naval heavy, when naval technology was kind of ramping up and getting more and more expensive. And so Britain or England was heavily reliant on kind of goldsmiths and gold-backed lenders at high interest, short duration loans that were very expensive to kind of fund their war effort. Whereas the Dutch had this, stock exchange, and it had sophisticated credit lines and a bond. I don't know if it had a bond market, but it had kind of the ability to underwrite long-term financing. And this kind of climaxed at the end of the First Dutch War which was a raid on the River Medway, where a Dutch ship went all the way up through Kent and made it all the way into kind of inland and started raiding towns and cities in Kent. And the fear just permeated through the English political establishment that we have to do something about this.
Yep.
We need to reform, otherwise we're going to be taken over. And so the Bank of England itself was founded on military safety defense purposes, to find long-term, low-interest borrowing to fund the state. And if you marry that with today, with Trump going around telling European NATO partners, you need to spend 5% of your GDP on defense, otherwise America's not going to defend you anymore. And the Spanish Prime Minister or someone senior in the Spanish government saying, well, we can't do that, I'm afraid, because it misaligns with our welfare program.
Yep.
I find that the timidity comes from us not being scared for we've outsourced our innovation, our safety to America.
Yep.
We've outsourced our manufacturing to China, and we're here to kind of have avocado on toast and flat whites and go on nice holidays and and sadly to a large extent have 1 in 5 households living on welfare and not in the workforce.
Absolutely.
So it would be a sense of paranoia and a sense of fear that America is not going to look after us forever may help us. So maybe your book will be well timed. Did you find that when you were researching the book? So it's a long-winded question, but the kind of the fear of survival often creates necessity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think sometimes you have to fend for yourself, and I think now is the time. And we are entering a multipolar world.
Yeah.
I'm not an economist, so I should probably stick to my investment research. But looking at the macro forces at the moment, there's a reshoring phenomena which is going on at the moment. So every country is worrying about themselves.
So what's reshoring? Can you just explain that for people?
Well, with the emergence of BRICS, and so there is now polarization of power. In my view, a few years down the road, the center of power may not primarily rest with the West. China is emerging, and there are other countries as well. So in this upcoming world of reshoring, we obviously need to fend for ourselves. We need to make sure our strategic assets are protected. And I don't want to sort of go into too many proposals of the book, then nobody's going to read it, because if I discuss everything. But I think at the moment we are too British to say no to an overseas buyer, regardless of what type of asset is being acquired. And we need to think about that. We need to reconsider our approach. And there is no shortage of capital or talent. Chunks and chunks of millionaires are leaving the UK.
Yeah.
I was reading yesterday, 16,000 millionaires are due to leave the UK in 2025 alone. The highest number on earth, pretty much across the board, even higher than China.
16,000 millionaires leaving
the UK in 2025, and 7,800 from China are expected to leave in 2025. Look at the population of China.
Yeah.
and then compare
Yeah.
to the UK.
Sorry, what was the number again? 16,000.
16,000.
Yeah. Which of a population of sort of 60 odd million is quite a large part of the tax base.
Exactly.
I mean, my take on that, and I'm sympathetic to the arguments of the sort of tax system, the regulatory system, the culture, the British culture of like, you know, it's the worst side of the aristocratic inheritance of, oh, look, how vulgar to try and make money, or how kind of crass. And then you've got the kind of the aristocratic paternalism married to the sort of socialistic, that's not your effort, that's not your reward, that's for us. You've done that off the back of other people, and so we're going to take that from you. And you've got this kind of marriage, the kind of worst kind of marriage. And I'm sympathetic to the kind of millionaire exodus argument because of the regulatory and tax burden. But part of me thinks it's actually a kind of collective action problem in many ways. So, I don't know if you've read Taleb at all. So, one of his books, Skin in the Game, he talks about the fact that he will, as a very wealthy person in America who is, you know, taxed very heavily, he never has a PA. He'll never go offshore because he's a foreigner who's become a US citizen, domestic, and he's part of the system. So he's going to use his money to influence and debate and promote good tax systems, good regulatory systems that encourage innovation and risk taking and allow people to kind of keep the fruits of their labor. And so I think, if I was to have a pledge to these millionaires, I would say, look, rather than leave, why don't you stay, get together, fund a think tank, speak to your MP, talk to people, get out on the street, get campaigning, and use the new media channels that we have to encourage people to get back in the system and believe that their success is something that's open to everyone. Absolutely. And it feels like they've lost their skin in the system because maybe they don't have the kind of the civic pride anymore because they've been beaten up by aggressive tax systems and all the rest. But if we can, if they're not going to do it, who is?
Absolutely. I think I don't like demonizing the system.
Yeah.
We all know what the problems are, but instead of just pointing fingers at the issues, we need to offer solutions. So we need to stay within the system. We should stay within the system and refine it, revise it, and make it better.
Yeah.
Instead of just turning our back on it or giving up or just leaving it. I came to this country 20 years ago, and this country has given me more than an opportunity. And that's part of the reason the book was written out of frustration.
Where did you come from?
Pakistan. I came here as a student. So what makes me sad is there is so much talent, so much capital. We've got everything here.
Yeah.
We just don't have the conviction to back British companies, buy British. If America can have Buy American Act, why can't we have Buy British? Yeah. Why can't we have a UK equity champion or some sort of an independent person whose job is to promote the British equities and reinvigorate this sense of national civic duty to back domestic businesses? This is not protectionist or protectionism or saying no to international. I think it's only fair. Every other country does it. We are the outliers, as I've said before.
And just talking about Shoaib the person, do you feel as someone who's sort of come here 20 years ago and emotionally invested in a country that sort of you've very much thrived in, is it a sense of sort of, there's a Kipling quote that comes because of his time living in the subcontinent. What does he of England know who only, something along the lines of, what does he of England know who only knows England? Because they don't get, having been here their whole life, how special it is. And so do you get frustrated with people going, no, this is, I better do this and tell you, because if you're not going to tell yourself, then someone from the outside, I'm not saying from the outside, but do you know what I mean, kind of who's come here. Do you get a sense that it's almost incumbent on you? I'm talking about myself as much as you in many ways. Yeah.
No, I think it's everyone's duty. I think I was listening to Arnold Schwarzenegger, recently, and he was talking about. He said, "I am, I was once a foreigner. I'm still a foreigner in the U.S. Having lived."
He was on The View, wasn't he? Was that the
exactly?
Yeah.
And he said, "It's our civic duty to because we should think of ourselves as guests in the country, and try your best to do your bit for the betterment of the country, which has given you all these opportunities." And that is exactly the whole point of this book. This is my way of contributing to a growing conversation.
Yeah.
And this is a much needed conversation we all need to have. We just need to be honest with ourselves, I think. Things are not looking too great at the moment.
Well, before we go down your solution set, which we'll do in a moment, one of the things you mentioned in the book, which we talked about it earlier, which was about property and cash.
Yep.
I feel like you were kind enough to watch the Fred Harrison episode I did about the taxation system and how it favours effectively owning property or land. And isn't that the economically rational thing to do? Because house prices, people will work hard, people will innovate, and the benefits of that will be captured by landowners. And so the bank will lend you cheap capital to buy land in a way that it wouldn't ever lend you to start a business. So until we deal with that economic rent problem, the people will always measure their wealth in their house price, not in their ISA. Yep. It's obviously this is a really complex problem and there's multiple solutions, but that is one that maybe is outside the scope of this book that maybe would help the solution set, is to kind of reduce the tax burden on capital and income and increase it on landowning.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything which can revive this British, stock market, that would be welcomed. And when you even when you look at the name ISA, investments, individual savings account, not investment savings account.
Yeah, individual savings account.
So that's the cultural thing. We need to change that. So when people are thinking of ISA, they think of cash savings. They are not thinking of investing. Mm. So that's the cultural aspect, which I have sort of alluded to in the book, which we need to shift, I think. And financial literacy would be very, very helpful.
Yeah, conversations like this for me are very helpful, because I'm obviously I'll have a very extreme or purist view, and I'll be like, well, we should scrap all taxes on income and capital and just fund the state through land value or rent taxation. But obviously the reality is that's such a long, impractical. The Overton window is too narrow for that to be a reality anytime soon, sadly. Working on it. Yeah. But in the meantime, you can do lots of small things which shouldn't be which may look like gimmicks, and you talk about this in your solution set. These things may seem like optics, but even small things like changing it from an individual savings account to an individual investment account or something like that would have a mindset impact. So let's talk about some of your solutions that you kind of and we don't have to do all of them, but maybe pick 2 or 3 that you think we could start with, and because what you've done is very helpfully set out the problem, and now what do we do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key ones that I would probably highlight is having a UK equity exposure being mandated. I'm not in favor of mandating allocation to British equities by the pension providers. I am in favor of mandating exposure. Make it transparent. So
how much they own.
Exactly. Any pension account holder logs onto the platform, they should see clearly how much their money is backing Britain, how much of their total assets are invested in British stocks, out of total assets and also out of equity, in pounds and pence. Yeah. I think this would be very helpful, because you can't back something if you don't know how much you are currently invested in. And at the moment, the nation doesn't feel like that it's connected. That there's this disconnect. They don't even know that they are part of the story, and they are related to these companies, and these are our companies. They don't know that. look at any newspaper, you see property pages and all of those, but hardly any FTSE 100. Didn't used to be like this in the 1980s, Telseed and all those, sort of days.
And there's a classic headline in any newspaper, bad news as property prices set to fall. And it's like, hang on, no, that's good news. For most people in this country, that's an excellent thing, because high property prices is not good for risk taking. If they keep going up forever, why would you invest money? You'd have less money to spend on people's goods and services, and you'd be spending all of it on rent. And I suspect the labelling thing is a very good idea, because I suspect most people don't even know how little they own.
Exactly.
They would be surprised to know that, what would you say, on average 2%, 3%, something like that of their portfolio is exposed to companies that employ, their family and their community. So that's one. So it's almost like a calorie or a kind of salt disclosure for a consumer food brand that you would have to kind of disclose how much of your domestic. And obviously, if it was 90%, that's too much. So you'd probably kind of go, okay, might be worth bringing that down a bit. What else have you thought about?
I think I've already mentioned SAPA, Strategic Asset Protection Authority, just to keep a track of what is being bought, what is under consideration, what has already been bought. So we need some sort of a tracker, a monitoring body, which can activate the Parliament with some real powers so at least we know what is being sold, because at the moment it's not very efficient in my personal view.
Right.
So, and the third one I would probably mention is the British Growth ISA. So I proposed having an additional 10K annual allowance separate to the existing 20K. And this 10K would only be eligible for those who are backing British businesses. When I say British businesses, if you invest it all in FTSE 100 generates more than 70% of the company generate their revenues from overseas. Yeah. So any stocks which generate at least 50%, of their earnings from the UK, that would sort of, qualify for that. Obviously, we can go through the weeds and, nuts and bolts. Yeah. But that is one of the proposals. I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so you don't try and change existing incentives, you create a new one, and it's cleaner.
Just as an add-on.
Yeah. Have you tried to talk? I mean, I know the book has come out recently, but are you going to try and get this in front of some policymakers or in front of some people who can amplify these ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the idea. I have made contact with certain people. Few people in the regulatory department are currently reading the book. I am trying to make contact with some people, on the politics side as well. So, and also, so we need both people from regulation and the policy side to get these implemented. And all of these are very simple, actionable, practical ideas, which will be, in my view, very, very helpful.
Yeah, because it's tempting to say we just need a cultural shift for people, but this can help. It's a virtuous circle. If you make some small incentive changes, then maybe that will promote a cultural shift, which then will create more demand for incentives to kind of invest. So it's certainly good to see some practical ideas. What do you think some of the pushbacks will be to some of your ideas? What do you expect some of the kind of criticisms that will come your way might end up being?
Yeah, I think some of the pushbacks would be that, this is political, or this is too protectionist. But in my view, none of what I have proposed is protectionist or something which is going to alienate Britain or which is going to make us less open. At the moment, I think we are too open, and we just need to step in, intervene, reassess what's going on at the moment, and just put some guardrails around it, really.
And how have you found the process of writing a book? Have you enjoyed it? Has it been challenging? Has it been one of those like learning to run a marathon or something like that? Did you want to give up a few times? Kind of, talk us through the idea. When did you get the idea to write a book? I know you said you were frustrated, but how did that frustration germinate into I'm going to write a book about it? And how was the process thereafter an execution? Because lots of us want to write a book, or we think we've got a book in us, but most people have always, never got past page 3. So you've done it. So talk us through that process.
Yeah. I felt relieved as I was going through it, because frustration has been building for years. You look at the Calistone data, it's more like an obituary, Every month there are outflows, the bleeding never stops. And I was getting almost depressing watching, everything, especially when you look at the legacy, how good it used to be, and how much capital we still have in the system, but it's just not for Britain.
It's a coordination problem. It's there, the ingredients
exactly.
Are there. It's just putting it in the right order and format.
And people in the industry, they want to say these things, but they just don't want to say it publicly because there's a risk around it. When I was writing the book, obviously at the back of my mind, I was thinking about compliance. I was thinking about my personal reputation. There are certain things in the book which may make other people uncomfortable, but I think that needed to be said. Somebody had to say it, and I've said it, and I back everything I've said in the book, and I've enjoyed the journey. Enjoyed in the sense that I was able to get all that frustration out, and I didn't want to come across as a guy just shouting from the corner. I wanted to propose some actionable solutions as well. So this is exactly what I've done. So I've thoroughly enjoyed the process. It's been challenging at times, especially with family commitment, 3 children, small children at home. So I would like to say thanks to my missus as well for her support. And as I said, most of it was written on the train between London and Manchester. So it's been emotionally hugely rewarding experience, I would say.
Yeah. And the plan next is to publicize it, try and get it out there, obviously do things like this, but would you have another project in mind?
Not at the moment, no. So, because when I was talking about this one, I had a chat with my missus that, is it worth, I'm thinking of it. And she said, you've just done a CFA. Give yourself a break. Don't even think about it. Because I was also thinking about doing a PhD and in artificial intelligence. Sorry, we're just slightly digressing. But this was too close to my heart to be sort of pushed back to the back burner. So, but at the moment, I think this project is big enough and close enough to my heart that I want to stay focused. Obviously, I've got a full-time job and a family, and I need some genuine support, people, selfless people, who, with utmost sincerity, who can get behind it and get it all sort of moving in the right direction. That's all. This book has not been written for any approval or any institutional approval or self-promotion. It has been written with utmost sincerity because I think what we have in this country is worth fighting for. And if we don't fight for it now, it's probably going to be too late if we don't do it now.
Well, hard to argue with that. So the kind of the mission or the zeal made it easy. I'm not saying it was easy, but it made the journey of writing the book and getting it done and getting it out there easier versus a lot of people who like the idea of writing a book because it sort of, they can tell people I'm writing a book and they can imagine the publicity. Like you said, you're not doing this for self-promotion. It comes from a place of duty and purpose. And I would suspect that you've done a better turn for the world by doing that than doing another, does the world need another PhD? Maybe, it could be helpful. You never know, but there's enough of those going around, and it's easier to macro bullshit than to micro bullshit. And you've given some micro analysis and solutions. So as you know, I like to kind of wrap the conversations up with something I call the long bet, where I ask every guest the same question at the end. Which is that you have a 10-year time frame to make a prediction. something that you think will happen over the next 10 years, or something that you would like to happen, or both. And we can see how you get on when as time passes, because as two people with small children, we know that time flies. For 10 years is actually nothing, whereas a few years ago it felt like a long time.
Absolutely. And I think I would say something along the lines of the themes of the book. In 10 years' time, this is my prediction and my hope as well, that we will remember 2025 as the lowest point in the history of our stock market. We will be turning the corner, and we will look back, having learned the lesson that it is worth backing your domestic economy. It is worth having a sense of pride in ownership, in owning domestic shares. And we will look back at this and we will say that, that was the low point in the history of British Stock Exchange, because in 2025, if the outflows continue, we will be completing a whole decade of outflows from UK equity funds, 10 years in a row. When I say we have become an outlier, this is exactly what I mean by that. So no serious economy should tolerate anything like this. We need to turn this around, and I think we will turn it around.
I like the use of the word serious. There's a great moment in the TV series Succession, I don't know if you've seen that, where Logan Roy is towards the end, he's sort of looking at his children and they're sort of all ganging up on him, and he sort of look, I love you all, but you're not serious people. And I feel like much of Europe has lost its seriousness, but maybe owing to multipolarity that we talked about, with China, Russia, the kind of Iranian regime and all the rest coming up, we will have no choice but to become serious. And in that seriousness, these institutions will have to find their meaning or purpose and flourish again, or we'll have to find new ones. Because if you made that long bet in 2015 and said, I predict over the next 10 years that every year we'll see an outflow of money from UK companies going into international companies, people would have gone, God, you must be a very depressed person. Surely not, go and have a coffee or a beer or something and cheer up. Nothing could be that bad, but it came true. And so it cannot go on forever. So the book is called The Great British Disconnect, The Nation That Stood By as the City Sold Its Soul. Available on Amazon.
It is.
And where can people find you, Shoaib? Where we'll link to it, but where do you mostly post? Is it LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok? Where can people find you?
It's on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Okay.
Yes.
And I'm sure that this book will have a decent impact on the state of direction that we're going in. So thank you for sparing the time. We really appreciate it. And
Likewise.
see you soon.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
This has been Meeting People. I've been your host, Amal Pandya. This is a podcast produced by Matt Cooper with music composed by Loverman.